When everyone runs out, they rush in.
But for firefighters, there are some dangers they don't train for, like post-traumatic stress syndrome.
And Tom Lyden of the Fox 9 Investigators is here. And Tom, a couple months ago, you were telling us about firefighters and cancer, but now this is a completely different issue.
Yeah, we heard a little bit about this after 9/11. There was some awareness, but I think we're just now realizing the huge scope of this problem. Tonight, you will hear from 2 Minnesota firefighters as they share some intensely emotional and personal stories. It's not easy for them to talk about this topic. It may not be easy for you to hear about it, but it's the reality of a job that has its share of invisible dangers. They become firefighters to save lives. But what happens when, in their own minds, all they see is death?
I'd see a lot of kids. And those are always the hardest ones.
For Brian Cristofano, becoming a St. Paul firefighter and paramedic was the fulfillment of a childhood dream. An amateur bodybuilder, he even looked the part, like Superman with a firefighter's helmet. But he would soon discover the job held its own kind of kryptonite.
I still once in a while will have nightmares, and they can be terrible. Sometimes my children's faces replace the faces of the patients.
Children like 2-year-old Amir Coleman, killed in an arson fire. Cristofano was left to comfort his mother.
When she came to the medic rig, the police officer let her in, closed the door, and she grabbed me by the shirt. She said, "Where's my son?" And I couldn't tell her. And I had to sit in there for a half hour with her until somebody finally told her.
You know, and it just really got to me. It, you know, it just didn't seem fair.
As a volunteer firefighter in the small town of Frazee, Scott Geiselhart knows there's always a chance he may know the victims personally.
You know, we had a lot of bad fatalities, and they were all back to back. You know, for a long time, everything from burnt victims to children to, you know, ice water rescues. And
like the young bartender in a horrific car crash who he recognized by the necklace she wore.
And every time I seen a necklace on a girl, it would remind me of that. You know, and it just really got to me.
To deal with the emotions tearing him apart, he turned to alcohol and then methamphetamine.
When I went to sleep, my kids were falling out of the sky on fire and falling in the water and drowning in front of me, and I was paralyzed. I couldn't reach them. Or the jaws of life wouldn't work, and they'd be in a car burning up, and I couldn't get them out. And that was every time I closed my eyes.
Both men were finally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
You know, I wasn't crazy. I didn't have a split personality. I had PTSD.
At first I thought, get out of here. You know, that's for the guys who are really heroes that are overseas fighting, and that's not me. And but it was.
It's estimated between 18 to 30% of all firefighters and paramedics have PTSD. Even at the low end, it's a rate twice that of the general population, and on par with military combat veterans. Nearly half of all firefighters have thought about suicide, and those with PTSD are 6 times more likely to attempt it.
You've had friends and colleagues who have committed suicide as well.
Yes.
How many?
I've had 3.
And Cristofano had a gun in his hand twice, ready to take his own life. Geiselhart went so far as to pull the trigger.
I couldn't believe I was alive, for one thing, that gun didn't work.
You know, there's this hero complex almost. It's like if I go and get help, then I'm not strong enough.
Dr. John Sutherland says all first responders deal with trauma, but it's when the symptoms of depression and anxiety continue for more than a month that it becomes PTSD. Some will self-medicate, others overcompensate.
I'll go into the burning house. They're the ones that maybe will take the risks a little bit more.
Like this time it'll be different.
It might be different. I may be able to replay it in a different way.
Dr. Sutherland says most firefighters can immediately recall at least 3 traumatic events. But it's the failure to talk about those memories that creates a dangerous and dark feedback loop.
Oftentimes there's nothing that the person could have done differently, and yet they replay it over and over in their mind, and that causes a lot of guilt and shame.
Yeah, it's the scars that you can't see that, haunt you.
Talk therapy allowed Scott Geiselhart to cope with his traumas and kick his addictions. His small volunteer department now has regular debriefings after every traumatic call.
There's more firefighters killing themselves than dying of line of duty deaths. That number's got to change.
For Brian Cristofano, PTSD would cost him his marriage and ultimately his job. The city of St. Paul denied his disability claim, and last month he retired from the St. Paul Fire Department.
They stated that unless there was a physical injury associated, say at a fire or anything like that, where I was physically injured, PTSD could not exist.
So they said unless there was an injury, you don't have PTSD.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
Correct. When it is an injury, it's an invisible injury, but an injury nonetheless.
Cristofano spent the last few weeks lobbying state lawmakers to make it easier for firefighters to claim PTSD as a job-related injury. But the measure never made it out of committee.
Well, I know we will be back at it next year, and we're not going to give up on pushing this until we get it through.
Because how do you save a superhero when they don't even know they need to be saved? The first responders of every kind suffering in silence, unable to live with their own memories.
Those 3 guys are with me, that I lost because they didn't get a chance. And I know there's a lot more. And families too. So I don't want anyone else to go through it.
It's important to emphasize there are some highly effective therapies now for PTSD. Most involve having people explore those traumatic memories. Because they're not talking about it, they often don't have an accurate picture of what actually happened. Dr. Sutherland says healing is not only possible, but so is resiliency, something that is known as post-traumatic growth. We have a lot more on this at the Fox 9 app, guys. I hope people check it out. We also have some of the symptoms to look for.
Yeah, and you can go to our website, I'm sure, to see a replay of this story if you know somebody out there who is in the fire service
Absolutely.
somewhere. They need to know about it.
Such an important issue to talk about. Are there resources automatically available to firefighters and first responders?
Not automatically, Kelsey. There's a real growing awareness of this issue, and big departments seem to get it. The problem is there are 20,000 firefighters in Minnesota. 18,000 of those are volunteer or on call. They work for very small departments. A lot of times they don't even have an employee assistance program. So there needs to be even more awareness, especially in greater Minnesota, for this issue, especially for the volunteer on-call firefighters.
Especially because they're the ones who are keeping us safe.
Absolutely.